Chapter 1. The Birth of a Leader. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born on May 29, 1917. It was a sunny day in Brookline, Massachusetts, a small, quiet town near Boston. His family was special, even back then. They were not just rich, they were ambitious. They believed in hard work, big dreams, and never giving up. John's father, Joseph Kennedy, was a businessman. He was smart, strong, and very determined. He wanted his children to succeed. "You can be the best," he often said. His mother, Rose, was kind and caring. She loved her children deeply and taught them about faith and helping others. Together, Joseph and Rose made sure their home was full of love and high expectations. John was the second child in a big family. He had 8 brothers and sisters. They all had strong personalities, and they loved to compete. But John, who everyone called Jack, was different. He wasn't the strongest or the loudest. He was small and often sick. Jack had many illnesses as a child. He spent days, sometimes weeks, in bed. He had fevers, stomach problems, and even scarlet fever, a dangerous disease at the time. His family worried about him. His mother would sit by his bed, holding his hand, whispering, "You'll be fine, Jack. You're strong." But Jack didn't always feel strong. Sometimes he felt lonely watching his brothers and sisters play outside. But Jack didn't waste his time in bed. He loved to read. He read about faraway places, brave heroes, and great adventures. He imagined himself as a knight, a sailor, or a leader. Books became his friends. They opened his mind to the world. The Kennedy family was full of energy. They were always playing games, arguing, and laughing together. Jack's older brother, Joe Jr., was the star of the family. He was big, healthy, and confident. Everyone thought he would grow up to do something great. Jack admired Joe, but didn't try to compete with him. Instead, he found his own way to shine. Jack was clever. He had a quick wit and a sharp sense of humor. At the dinner table, while his siblings argued, Jack would make a joke. Everyone would laugh. Even when he was sick, Jack found ways to cheer people up. His charm made him stand out. School wasn't always easy for Jack. He was smart, but he didn't love studying. He liked sports, jokes, and adventures more than homework. Teachers sometimes got frustrated with him. "Jack, you have so much potential. Why don't you try harder?" they would ask. But Jack wasn't lazy. He just liked doing things his way. If a subject interested him, he could spend hours learning about it. He loved history and stories about great leaders. George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. Jack admired their courage and wanted to be like them. The Kennedys spent their summers in Hyannisport, a beautiful seaside town. The children played on the beach, swam in the ocean, and raced sailboats. Jack loved the water. He felt free and alive when he was sailing. It became one of his favorite things to do. But even during these fun times, Jack's health was a problem. One summer, he became so sick he had to go to the hospital. Doctors didn't know what was wrong. His parents were scared. Rose stayed by his side, praying for him to get better. Slowly, he recovered. But the experience left a mark on Jack. He knew life was fragile. It made him appreciate every moment. As Jack grew older, he became more curious about the world. He asked lots of questions. Why do some people have so much and others so little? He wondered. His father explained how the world worked, but Jack wasn't satisfied. He wanted to see it for himself. At home, politics was always a topic of discussion. Joseph Kennedy had big dreams for his family. He told his children, "You are Kennedys. You can make a difference in the world." Jack listened, but wasn't sure what he wanted to do. He didn't feel as confident as Joe Jr., but deep down, he had his own dreams. One day, Jack overheard his father talking to a friend. "Joe will be the leader of the family," his father said proudly. "He has everything it takes to succeed." Jack felt a mix of emotions. He loved Joe, but he also wanted to prove himself. He wanted to show his father that he too could do something great. Jack's chance to shine came in small ways. He wrote clever essays at school. He made friends wherever he went. And he never gave up, even when he felt weak. His illnesses didn't stop him. They made him stronger. Jack began to believe that he could face any challenge. The Kennedy household was full of competition. Who could run the fastest? Who could tell the funniest story? Who could win at chess? Jack often lost, but he didn't mind. Losing made him try harder. "Next time, I'll win," he'd say with a grin. This spirit stayed with Jack his whole life. He learned to fight through pain, to keep going when things were tough. He didn't always follow the rules, but he always found a way to succeed. His family called it the Kennedy Drive. Jack had it, even if it looked different from Joe's. By the time Jack was a teenager, he had grown stronger. He still got sick, but he didn't let it slow him down. He played football, swam, and sailed with his brothers. He also started to think more about the future. What kind of man did he want to be? What difference could he make? Jack didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing. He wanted to live an exciting life. He didn't want to sit still or follow an ordinary path. Jack wanted to explore, to learn, and to lead. He didn't know how he would do it, but he was ready to try. And so, the boy from Brookline began his journey. A small, curious, often sick boy who dreamed of doing something great. Jack Kennedy didn't look like a leader yet, but deep inside, the spark of leadership was already there. Chapter 2. A Boy with Big Dreams. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, or Jack as everyone called him, was not an ordinary boy. His childhood was full of laughter, adventure, and challenges. Growing up in the big Kennedy family meant life was never boring. There was always something happening. A game to play, a race to win, or a joke to share. Jack and his brothers and sisters spent hours outside. They played football in the yard, built forts, and in winter had snowball fights until their hands were numb. Summers were even better. The Kennedy family had a house in Hyannisport, near the sea. Jack loved the ocean. He spent hours sailing, feeling the wind in his face and the salt water on his skin. On the boat, he felt free. But Jack's life wasn't all fun. He was often sick. Sometimes it was just a cold, but other times it was more serious. When he was 2 years old, Jack had scarlet fever, a dangerous disease at the time. His parents were terrified. He stayed in the hospital for weeks, fighting to get better. And he did. But even after that, Jack's health stayed fragile. Jack hated being sick. It meant he had to stay in bed while his brothers and sisters played outside. Some days, he felt lonely. He could hear the laughter and shouts from the yard while he lay under a heavy blanket, feeling weak and tired. But Jack didn't waste his time. He loved to read. His mother often brought him books, big, heavy books full of exciting stories. Jack read about kings and queens, heroes and explorers. He read about brave men who went to war and clever leaders who made history. These stories filled his imagination. Jack would close his eyes and dream. What if he could be like those heroes? What if he could do something great? These dreams gave him hope. They made him feel strong, even when his body felt weak. Jack's father, Joseph Kennedy, was a big influence on him. Joseph believed in hard work and big dreams. He often told Jack, "You can be anything you want to be." These words stayed with Jack. His father's confidence made him believe in himself, even when he doubted his abilities. Joseph pushed all his children to be the best. He wanted them to work hard, win competitions, and never give up. Jack admired his father, but didn't always follow the rules. He liked to have fun. He loved to laugh and make jokes, even when he got into trouble for it. Life in the Kennedy family was a mix of fun and competition. The children were always trying to outdo each other. Who could run the fastest? Who could tell the funniest story? Who could win at chess or finish a puzzle first? Jack often lost. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but he was clever. If he couldn't win with strength, he'd win with his wit. Jack's older brother, Joe Jr., was the family star. Joe was strong, confident, and seemed to succeed at everything. Jack admired Joe, but didn't try to compete with him. Instead, Jack found his own way to shine. He made people laugh. He told stories. And he listened, really listened, when others talked. Despite his illnesses, Jack was full of energy when he felt well. He loved adventure. Once, while playing in the yard, he climbed a tall tree. His siblings cheered him on. "Higher, Jack!" they shouted. Jack climbed until he was almost at the top. But then, the branch beneath him cracked. He held on tightly, his heart pounding. Slowly, he climbed back down. When he reached the ground, his brothers clapped and laughed. Jack laughed too, even though his hands were shaking. He loved the thrill of taking risks. At school, Jack wasn't always the best student. He was smart, but he didn't like sitting still for long. His teachers often said, "Jack, you're full of potential. You just need to focus." But Jack had his own way of learning. He asked lots of questions. He wanted to know how things worked and why people made the choices they did. Jack especially loved history. He loved learning about great leaders like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. These men inspired him. They made him wonder, could he lead someday? Could he help others and leave his mark on the world? One of Jack's favorite memories was sailing with his father. On quiet afternoons, they would take the boat out into the ocean. The sea stretched wide and endless around them. The waves rocked the boat gently as they talked. "Jack," his father would say, "the world is full of challenges. But challenges are what make life interesting. You have to face them head on." Jack nodded, watching the horizon. He didn't always understand his father's words at the time, but they stayed with him. As Jack grew older, his curiosity grew too. He started to notice the world wasn't fair. Some people had a lot, while others had very little. This bothered him. He asked his father, "Why do some people have to struggle so much?" His father's answer didn't satisfy him. Jack wanted to understand more. He wanted to see the world for himself. His dream of becoming a hero wasn't just about adventure. It was about helping people, making things better. Jack's illnesses taught him to be strong in his own way. He learned to laugh, even when life was hard. He learned to dream, even when he was stuck in bed. And he learned to never give up, even when the odds were against him. His mother often reminded him, "Jack, you're special. You have something to give the world." Jack didn't know what that was yet, but he wanted to find out. Jack's childhood was full of ups and downs. He had happy days and difficult ones. But through it all, he kept dreaming. He dreamed of adventure, of greatness, of making a difference. He didn't know how or when it would happen, but deep down, he believed in his future. Jack Kennedy was still a boy, but the seeds of a leader were already growing inside him. Little did he know, those dreams would one day change the world. Chapter 3. Lessons at Harvard. When Jack was 18 years old, he left home to attend Harvard University. Harvard was one of the most famous schools in America. It was a place for smart and ambitious students. Jack's older brother, Joe Jr., had gone there before him, and everyone expected Jack to do just as well. At first, Jack didn't take school too seriously. He was charming and funny, and people liked him right away. He made friends easily. He joined clubs, played sports, and went to parties. He enjoyed life at Harvard, but his grades weren't great. He often joked about how much he could get away with. But deep down, Jack knew he wasn't living up to his potential. Jack loved football and joined the Harvard football team. He wasn't the biggest or the strongest player, but he played with heart. One day during a practice game, he was hit hard and injured his back. The pain was terrible, but Jack didn't complain. He stayed on the field, determined to keep going. That was Jack's way. He never gave up, no matter how hard things got. But his back injury didn't heal properly. He had to quit the team. It was a painful decision, both physically and emotionally. For the rest of his life, Jack would struggle with back pain. But this experience taught him something important. Life doesn't always go as planned, and you have to adapt. Jack's health problems followed him to Harvard. He caught colds easily and often felt tired. Sometimes he missed classes because he wasn't well enough to get out of bed. But Jack didn't let this stop him. When he couldn't go to class, he would read in his dorm room. History and politics became his favorite subjects. Jack loved to ask questions in class. He didn't just want to know the facts. He wanted to understand why things happened. His professors noticed this. They said, "Jack, you think differently. That's a gift." Jack didn't realize it yet, but his way of thinking would become one of his greatest strengths. In his second year at Harvard, something happened that changed Jack's life. His father, Joseph, sent him on a trip to Europe. "Go see the world," his father told him. Jack packed his bags, not knowing how much this trip would affect him. In Europe, Jack saw things he had only read about in books. He visited London, Paris, and Berlin. The cities were beautiful, but there was also tension in the air. Adolf Hitler had risen to power in Germany, and war seemed close. People were scared. Jack could see it in their faces. He traveled to Czechoslovakia, a small country under threat from Hitler. There, Jack met people who had lost everything because of politics and war. He listened to their stories and felt their fear. It was the first time Jack truly understood how powerful and dangerous leaders could be. When Jack returned to Harvard, he was different. The trip had opened his eyes. He couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen in Europe. He began to care more about his studies. History and government were no longer just subjects. They were tools to understand the world. For one of his classes, Jack wrote a long paper about Britain's response to Hitler's rise. He argued that Britain had made mistakes by not standing up to Hitler sooner. He worked hard on the paper, reading everything he could find on the topic. When he turned it in, he wasn't sure what his professor would think. The professor was impressed. "Jack," he said, "you have a talent for writing. Use it." Jack felt proud. For the first time, he realized he could use his mind and his words to make a difference. Jack started to focus more on school, but he didn't lose his fun side. He still loved making people laugh. His friends often said, "Jack has a way of bringing people together." He had a natural charm that made him the center of attention, even when he wasn't trying. One of his closest friends at Harvard was Lem Billings. The two became inseparable. They spent hours talking about everything: sports, history, politics, and life. Lem later said, "Jack was always thinking about the future. He wanted to do something important." Jack's family played a big role in shaping his time at Harvard. His father often sent him letters full of advice. "Work hard, Jack," his father would write. "The world needs leaders like you." Jack also stayed close to his brother Joe. Joe was studying law and preparing for a bright future. He was still the family star, and Jack admired him. But Jack also began to feel his own ambitions growing. Jack's younger sister, Kathleen, was another big influence. Kathleen, or Kick as everyone called her, was fun, bold, and full of life. She and Jack were very close. She believed Jack could do great things, and her encouragement meant a lot to him. During his last year at Harvard, Jack began writing his senior thesis, a big research paper that every student had to complete to graduate. Jack's topic was the events leading up to World War II. He focused on why some countries had been too slow to act against Hitler. Jack worked tirelessly, reading, writing, and revising. When he finished, his father read the paper and said, "This is good, Jack. You should publish it." With his father's help, Jack turned his thesis into a book called Why England Slept. The book explained how Britain's mistakes had allowed Hitler to grow stronger. When the book was published, it became a surprise success. People praised Jack's ideas and writing. Jack was proud, but he didn't let the success go to his head. He knew he still had much to learn. Graduating from Harvard was a proud moment for Jack. He had grown a lot during his time there. He started as a carefree young man who loved sports and parties. But by the end, he was a thoughtful writer and thinker, ready to face the challenges of the world. As Jack walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he thought about all he had learned. The lessons weren't just from books. They came from his travels, his friendships, and his struggles. Jack knew that life would test him again, but he felt ready. Jack's time at Harvard shaped him in ways he didn't fully understand yet. He had discovered his love for history, his talent for writing, and his passion for making a difference. These lessons stayed with him as he moved into the next chapter of his life, a chapter full of challenges, courage, and leadership. Little did Jack know, his journey was just beginning. Chapter 4. A Hero at War. World War II began in 1939. Countries around the world were drawn into the conflict. By 1941, America joined the fight after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Young men everywhere signed up to serve. Among them was Jack Kennedy. Jack wanted to join the army, but his health problems made it difficult. His back pain and illnesses were a concern for doctors, but Jack didn't give up. He tried again and again. Finally, with the help of his father, he was accepted into the Navy. Jack was determined to serve his country. After training, Jack was given command of a small boat called PT-109. PT boats were fast and light, used by the Navy to attack enemy ships. Jack was excited but nervous. He wanted to prove himself as a leader. His crew liked him right away. Jack wasn't the kind of leader who gave orders and stood back. He worked alongside his men, fixing the boat, loading supplies, and making sure everyone was ready for action. He made jokes to keep spirits high. But when it was time to focus, Jack was serious. In 1943, Jack and his crew were sent to the Pacific Ocean. Their job was dangerous. They had to patrol the dark waters and attack Japanese ships. Every night, they faced the threat of enemy fire. Jack felt the pressure, but he didn't let it show. He wanted his men to feel safe, even in the face of danger. One night, On August 2nd, 1943, Jack and his crew were patrolling near the Solomon Islands. It was dark and the sea was quiet. Suddenly, a Japanese destroyer, a large, heavily armed ship, appeared out of nowhere. Before Jack could react, the destroyer slammed into PT-109. The impact was violent. The boat split in two. Jack and his crew were thrown into the water. The sea was cold and filled with oil from the wrecked boat. Jack shouted, "Is everyone alive?" His men called back one by one. 2 crew members were missing, and Jack feared the worst. He swam through the wreckage, searching, but he couldn't find them. The surviving crew clung to pieces of the broken boat. Some were injured. Everyone was scared. But Jack stayed calm. He knew he had to lead them. "We'll make it," he said. "Stick together." Hours passed. The sun rose and the heat became unbearable. The men were exhausted, hungry, and thirsty. Jack decided they couldn't stay in the water. Nearby, he saw a small island. It was far, but it was their only chance. Jack told his crew, "We're swimming to that island." Jack took a piece of rope and tied it to an injured crew member named Patrick McMahon. Patrick couldn't swim because of his burns. Jack put the rope in his mouth and began to swim, pulling Patrick behind him. The journey was long and painful. The salt water stung Jack's wounds, and his back ached terribly. But he didn't stop. He couldn't leave his man behind. After hours of swimming, Jack and the crew reached the island. It was small and empty, with no food or fresh water. But it was land. They collapsed on the shore, too tired to speak. Jack looked at his men. They were alive, but barely. He knew they couldn't survive long without help. The next morning, Jack decided to swim again. This time, he swam to another island, hoping to find help. The current was strong, and sharks were in the water. Jack's muscles burned, and his body begged him to stop. But he kept going. "I have to do this," he thought. "My crew is counting on me." On the island, Jack found friendly villagers. They didn't speak English, but they understood Jack needed help. They gave him food and water and promised to send a message to the Allied forces. Jack carved a message on a coconut shell. 11 alive. Need help. Kennedy. The villagers took the message and paddled their canoe to find help. Jack returned to his crew. Days passed. They were weak and scared. But Jack kept their spirits up. He told them stories and made plans for what they would do after the war. "We're going home," he said. "Just hold on." Finally, after 6 long days, a rescue boat arrived. Jack's crew cheered as they were pulled from the island. They were saved. The men owed their lives to Jack's bravery and determination. News of Jack's heroism spread quickly. When he returned to America, people called him a hero. But Jack didn't feel like a hero. He thought about the 2 men who had died when PT-109 was hit. He carried that sadness with him for the rest of his life. Still, he was proud of what he had done for his crew. His actions showed his strength, courage, and leadership. For his bravery, Jack received the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. The citation read, "For heroism in the rescue of his crew. Jack didn't talk much about his medal, but his family was proud. His father said, "Jack, you've proven yourself. You're a true Kennedy." The experience of war changed Jack. He saw how fragile life was. He saw the courage of ordinary people. And he saw how important leadership was in times of crisis. These lessons stayed with him. Jack returned to civilian life with a new sense of purpose. He had faced death and survived. Now, he wanted to make a difference in the world. He didn't know it yet, but this experience would prepare him for the challenges ahead. Jack's story of PT 109 became famous. It was written about in newspapers and magazines. People admired his courage and leadership. But for Jack, it was about more than the headlines. It was about the bond he shared with his crew, the strength he found in himself, and the lessons he learned in the darkest moments. Jack Kennedy was no longer just a boy from Massachusetts. He was a hero, a leader, and a man ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 5. Entering Politics. After World War II, Jack Kennedy returned home to a hero's welcome. Newspapers told the story of his courage in the Pacific, and people admired him for saving his crew. But Jack didn't feel like a hero. He thought about the men who didn't make it home. Their loss weighed on him. He wanted to honor their memory by doing something meaningful with his life. Jack wasn't sure what to do at first. He had always been curious about politics and history. During the war, he had seen how decisions made by leaders affected the lives of millions. He wanted to make a difference, too. Jack's father, Joseph Kennedy, had big dreams for his children. He believed they could achieve anything. "Jack," his father said one day, "the world needs strong leaders. You can help people. You should run for office." Jack listened, but he wasn't sure. Politics seemed difficult and uncertain. Did he have what it took? Joseph encouraged him. "You face bigger challenges, Jack," he said. "You have a way with people. They trust you." Jack thought about it. He didn't see himself as a politician, but the idea of helping others excited him. Maybe this was his path. In 1946, an opportunity came. A seat in the U.S. House of Representatives was open in Massachusetts, Jack's home state. Jack decided to run. He was just 29 years old, young and full of energy. Some people thought he didn't have enough experience, but Jack believed he could win. The campaign was hard work. Jack visited neighborhoods, knocked on doors, and spoke at community events. He talked about the future, about how he wanted to create jobs, improve education, and help veterans. People liked his ideas, and they liked him. He was friendly, charming, and genuine. Jack's health was still a problem. He often felt tired and weak, but he didn't let it show. He worked long hours, meeting voters and shaking hands. He wore his famous smile, even when he was in pain. His family supported him every step of the way. His siblings helped with the campaign, and his mother and father cheered him on. The campaign trail wasn't always easy. Jack faced criticism from older, more experienced politicians. They called him too young, and said he didn't understand the needs of the people. But Jack didn't back down. He listened to their words, learned from their experience, and kept moving forward. On election day, the results came in. Jack had won. He became a congressman for Massachusetts. When he took his seat in Washington, D.C., he felt both excitement and fear. The halls of Congress were filled with powerful and experienced politicians. Jack knew he had a lot to learn. As a congressman, Jack worked hard. He studied the issues, listened to the people, and tried to make a difference. His health often got in the way. Sometimes he was too sick to attend meetings. Other times, he worked from his bed, reading reports and writing letters to his voters. Despite the challenges, Jack didn't give up. He believed that leadership wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up and doing your best. He wanted to prove to the people of Massachusetts that he was there for them. Jack's charm and intelligence helped him make friends in Congress. He worked with people from both political parties. He believed in cooperation. "We can accomplish more together," he often said. This attitude earned him respect, even from those who didn't agree with him. Jack's speeches in Congress were clear and powerful. He spoke about helping veterans find jobs and making education more affordable. He also talked about the need for peace. After seeing war firsthand, Jack believed it was the duty of leaders to prevent future conflicts. Jack's time in Congress taught him many lessons. He learned how to negotiate, how to listen, and how to lead. He also learned how to handle criticism. Some people thought he wasn't doing enough. Others thought he was too ambitious. Jack didn't let their words discourage him. Instead, he used them as motivation to work harder. By 1952, Jack had spent 6 years in Congress. He began to think about his next steps. His ambition had grown. He wanted to have a bigger impact. He wanted to help more people. Jack decided to run for the U.S. Senate. This was a big decision. The Senate was more powerful than the House, and the race would be tougher. Jack's opponent was Henry Cabot Lodge, a popular and experienced senator. Many people thought Jack didn't stand a chance, but Jack believed in himself. He launched another energetic campaign, traveling across Massachusetts to meet voters. Once again, his family helped. His younger brother, Bobby, became his campaign manager. Together, they worked day and night. The campaign was intense. Jack faced criticism about his youth and health, but he responded with confidence. He focused on the issues that mattered to people: jobs, health care, and education. His speeches inspired hope. Together, we can create a better future, he told the crowds. On election day, Jack won again. He became a senator for Massachusetts. The victory was a turning point in his life. He had proven that he could lead, even in the face of doubt. Jack's dream of helping others was coming true. As a senator, Jack continued to work on issues he cared about. He supported laws to improve schools, help veterans, and strengthen the economy. He also began to think more about global issues. The world was changing, and Jack wanted to be part of shaping its future. Jack's health continued to challenge him. He underwent several surgeries for his back, and the recovery was long and painful. But even during these difficult times, he didn't stop working. From his hospital bed, he wrote letters, read reports, and stayed connected with his staff. Jack's experiences in politics made him dream even bigger. What if he could become president? The idea seemed impossible at first. He was still young, and America had never elected a Catholic president before. But Jack believed in the power of hard work and hope. He began to prepare himself for the biggest challenge of his life. Jack Kennedy's journey in politics was just beginning. He had proven himself as a congressman and a senator. He had faced criticism, illness, and doubt, but he had never given up. Jack's story was one of courage, determination, and a deep desire to help others. Little did he know, his greatest challenges and his greatest triumphs were still ahead. Before we begin Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on WooEnglish. Remember, this content is specially made for WooEnglish listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of WooEnglish's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6. A Young President. In 1960, America was ready for a new leader. The country faced many challenges, at home and around the world. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union brought fear of nuclear war. At the same time, the fight for civil rights was growing louder. People wanted change, hope, and a brighter future. Jack Kennedy believed he could bring that change. At just 43 years old, he announced that he would run for president. It was a bold decision. Many people doubted him. He was young, Catholic, and relatively new to politics compared to his opponents. But Jack was confident. He believed in his vision for America. Jack's opponent in the race was Richard Nixon, the Vice President of the United States. Nixon was experienced and well-known. Many thought he would easily win, but Jack had something special, his charisma. When he spoke, people listened. He had a way of making them feel hopeful. The campaign was intense. Jack traveled all over the country, meeting people and sharing his ideas. He spoke about what he called the new frontier. This was his vision for America, a future filled with progress, equality, and peace. Jack wanted to inspire people to dream big and work together. For the first time in history, television played a big role in the election. Jack and Nixon debated on live TV. Millions of Americans watched as the two candidates answered tough questions. Nixon was serious and experienced, but Jack appeared calm, confident, and full of energy. He looked straight into the camera and spoke to the American people as if he were speaking to each of them personally. After the debate, people couldn't stop talking about Jack. His charm and confidence won over many voters. Some even said it was the debates that changed the course of the election. As Election Day approached, the race became closer and closer. Jack's campaign team worked tirelessly. His younger brother Bobby managed the campaign and helped Jack stay focused. Jack's wife, Jackie, also played an important role. She charmed voters with her grace and intelligence. Together, they made a powerful team. Finally, on November 8, 1960, the votes were counted. Jack had won. He was elected as the 35th President of the United States. The victory was narrow, but it was historic. Jack had made history as the youngest man and the first Catholic ever elected president. The inauguration took place on January 20th, 1961. It was a cold, snowy day in Washington, D.C., but thousands of people gathered to watch. Jack stood before the crowd, ready to address the nation. His speech would become one of the most famous in American history. "Ask not what your country can do for you," Jack said, his voice clear and strong. "Ask what you can do for your country." The words sent a wave of inspiration across the crowd and the country. Jack was calling Americans to action. He wanted everyone to work together to build a better future. As president, Jack faced many challenges. The Cold War was growing more dangerous. The Soviet Union had just sent a man into space, and America was falling behind in the space race. Jack knew this was a critical moment. He made a bold promise. America would send a man to the moon before the end of the decade. This promise excited people. It wasn't just about winning the space race. It was about proving that America could achieve the impossible. Jack believed in the power of dreams and hard work, and he inspired the nation to believe too. At home, Jack faced another important challenge: the fight for civil rights. African Americans were demanding equal rights, but the country was deeply divided. Jack supported their cause. He believed that all Americans, no matter their race, deserved freedom and equality. In his speeches, Jack spoke about justice and fairness. "The rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened," he said. But progress was slow. Jack knew that real change would take time and courage. He promised to keep fighting for what was right. Jack's time in the White House was full of both triumphs and tests. He worked to improve education, create jobs, and strengthen America's role in the world. He met with world leaders, trying to build peace during a time of great tension. One of Jack's most famous moments came during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The Soviet Union had placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the United States. The world held its breath as Jack worked to find a solution. For 13 days, the crisis brought the world to the brink of war. But Jack's calm leadership helped avoid disaster. The missiles were removed, and the world stepped back from the edge. Despite the pressures of being president, Jack always made time for his family. He and Jackie had 2 young children, Caroline and John Jr. They brought joy and life to the White House. People loved seeing pictures of Jack playing with his children on the lawn or sharing quiet moments with Jackie. Jack's youth and energy brought a sense of hope to the country. He and Jackie were seen as symbols of a new, modern America. The White House became known as Camelot, a place of magic and possibility. But Jack's time as president wasn't easy. He faced criticism from those who didn't agree with his policies. Some people thought he was too young or too ambitious. Others thought he wasn't doing enough to address the problems facing the country. Jack listened to the criticism, but he didn't let it stop him. He stayed focused on his goals. By 1963, Jack had been president for nearly 3 years. He had achieved many things, but he also knew there was more to do. He wanted to continue fighting for civil rights, strengthen America's economy, and ensure peace around the world. He began preparing for the next election, hoping to win a second term. Jack's time as president was short, but it left a lasting impact. He brought a sense of hope and possibility to America. He inspired people to believe in their country and in themselves. At just 43 years old, he had shown that youth and vision could change the world. Jack's journey was far from over, but already he had become one of the most beloved leaders in American history. Chapter 7. The Cuban Missile Crisis. Being President of the United States was never easy, but in October 1962, John F. Kennedy faced one of the greatest challenges of his life. It began with a secret. American spy planes had discovered something shocking in Cuba, a small island just 90 miles from Florida. The Soviet Union was building missile sites there. These were not ordinary missiles. They were nuclear missiles, powerful enough to destroy entire cities in minutes. The news was terrifying. Jack and his advisors knew what this meant. If these missiles were launched, millions of Americans could die. The Cold War had always been dangerous, but now the threat was closer than ever. Jack called a meeting of his top advisors. They gathered in a small room at the White House, known as the Cabinet Room. For hours, they debated what to do. Some wanted to attack Cuba right away, but Jack worried this could start a nuclear war. Others suggested doing nothing, but Jack knew that was too risky. He needed a plan that would keep Americans safe without starting a war. We have to be strong, but careful, Jack told his team. The whole world is watching. Jack decided to act quickly. He announced a naval blockade around Cuba. This meant that no ships from the Soviet Union could bring weapons to the island. American warships surrounded Cuba, ready to stop any Soviet ships that tried to cross the line. On October 22, 1962, Jack spoke to the American people on television. His voice was calm, but firm. The United States will not allow nuclear missiles in Cuba, he said. We are prepared to defend ourselves if necessary. Families across America watched the speech in silence. They were scared. Schools held emergency drills, teaching children what to do if a nuclear bomb fell. People built bomb shelters in their backyards. Everyone hoped for the best, but feared the worst. For 13 days, the world held its breath. Soviet ships carrying more missiles sailed toward Cuba. Would they stop at the blockade, or would they try to break through, risking war? Jack stayed calm under pressure. He held secret meetings every day, weighing his options. He also wrote letters to the leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev. In the letters, Jack tried to find a peaceful solution. "We both want to avoid war," he wrote. "Let us work together to make that happen." The tension grew with each passing day. American military forces were on high alert. Bombers with nuclear weapons were ready to fly at a moment's notice. The world was on the brink of disaster. Then, on October 24th, something remarkable happened. The Soviet ships approaching the blockade stopped. They turned around. It was a small victory, but the crisis wasn't over yet. The missiles already in Cuba were still there. Jack continued to negotiate with Khrushchev. Finally, on October 28th, the two leaders reached a deal. The Soviet Union agreed to remove its missiles from Cuba. In return, the United States promised not to invade Cuba. Secretly, Jack also agreed to remove American missiles from Turkey near the Soviet Union's border. The crisis was over. The world breathed a sigh of relief. Jack's leadership during the Cuban Missile Crisis was praised around the world. He had stayed calm and strong in the face of danger. He had avoided war while protecting the safety of the American people. Many said it was his finest moment as president. But Jack knew how close the world had come to disaster. He often thought about the lessons of the crisis. He believed that communication and diplomacy were the keys to peace. He also believed that nuclear weapons were too dangerous to ever be used. The Cuban Missile Crisis changed Jack forever. He became more determined to work for peace. In the months that followed, he gave speeches about the need to reduce nuclear weapons. He said, "We must never put the future of humanity at risk again." Jack's actions during those 13 days showed the world what true leadership looked like. He proved that courage and calm could overcome fear and chaos. The crisis had tested him like never before, and he had risen to the challenge. The Cuban Missile Crisis remains one of the most dramatic moments in history. It showed how close the world could come to destruction, but also how strong leadership could pull it back from the edge. For Jack Kennedy, it was a defining moment, one that cemented his legacy as a leader who stood for peace and humanity. Jack's story was far from over, but those 13 days would always be remembered as a time when he saved the world from its darkest hour. Chapter 8. Fighting for Civil Rights. In the 1960s, America was changing. Black Americans were fighting for their civil rights. They wanted freedom and fairness, the same rights as everyone else. But the country was deeply divided. Many places, especially in the South, still had segregation. Black and white people were kept apart. In schools, on buses, in restaurants. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right. Jack Kennedy believed in justice. He believed every American deserved freedom, no matter their skin color. But as president, he also knew the fight for civil rights would not be easy. There were many people who did not want change. They wanted to keep things the way they were. The civil rights movement was growing stronger. Brave leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks were inspiring millions. Black Americans marched in the streets, demanding their rights. They held peaceful protests and gave powerful speeches. But they also faced violence. Protesters were beaten, arrested, and sometimes even killed. Jack watched these events closely. He admired the courage of the protesters. He knew they were fighting for something important. But at first, Jack moved carefully. He worried about dividing the country even more. He wanted to bring people together, not push them apart. In 1961, civil rights activists called Freedom Riders began traveling on buses through the South. They wanted to end segregation in bus stations, but their journey was dangerous. Angry mobs attacked the buses and beat the riders. Some were arrested. Others barely escaped with their lives. Jack was shocked by the violence. He sent federal marshals to protect the Freedom Riders. He also began working with civil rights leaders to find solutions. But the problems were bigger than just buses. Black Americans faced discrimination everywhere, in housing, in jobs, and even in voting. One of the biggest moments came in 1962. A black man named James Meredith wanted to attend the University of Mississippi, a school that had always been all white. The state refused to let him in. Crowds gathered to block James from entering the campus. The situation grew tense. Jack decided to act. He sent federal troops to protect James and ensure he could attend the university. It wasn't easy. Riots broke out. People threw rocks and bottles at the soldiers. 2 people died in the violence. But in the end, James Meredith walked onto campus and became a student. It was a victory for civil rights and for Jack's leadership. By 1963, the fight for civil rights could no longer be ignored. Jack gave a powerful speech to the nation. He looked straight into the camera and said, "We are confronted with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and as clear as the American Constitution. It is time to act." Jack's words inspired millions. He spoke about fairness and justice, about the need to treat every person with dignity. "We are all created equal," he said. "Now is the time to make that promise real." Jack knew that words were not enough. He needed to take action. He proposed a new law called the Civil Rights Act. This law would end segregation in public places. It would make it illegal to discriminate against someone because of their race. It was a bold step, and it faced strong opposition. In Congress, some politicians fought hard against the Civil Rights Act. They made speeches, held meetings, and tried to block the law from passing. They said it was too much change, too fast. But Jack didn't give up. He worked tirelessly, meeting with leaders, building support, and convincing others to join him. While Jack fought for civil rights in Washington, protests continued across the country. In August 1963, more than 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. for the March on Washington. It was one of the largest protests in American history. At the march, Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. He spoke about a future where children of all races could play together, where freedom and equality would be real for everyone. Jack was deeply moved. He knew this movement was bigger than any one person. It was about the soul of the nation. But not everyone admired Jack's actions. Many people, especially in the South, were angry. They called him a traitor to his race. Some even sent threats to the White House. Jack didn't let the anger stop him. He believed he was doing the right thing. In private, Jack admitted how hard the fight was. "This is the most difficult issue I've ever faced," he told a friend, "but it's also the most important." His determination never wavered. Jack's leadership on civil rights inspired hope, but the country was still deeply divided. The Civil Rights Act was making progress, but it hadn't yet become law by the time Jack's presidency ended. Even so, his support for the movement had made a huge impact. Jack showed the world that leadership was about courage, about standing up for what's right, even when it's not popular. He believed America could be better, fairer, and stronger if everyone was treated equally. Today, the Civil Rights Act is one of the most important laws in American history. It helped to end segregation and open the door to greater equality. Jack's work laid the foundation for this change. His courage and vision gave others the strength to continue the fight. Jack Kennedy's dream was an America where freedom and fairness were not just words, but realities for all people. His actions showed that even in the face of division, progress was possible. Chapter 9. Dreams for the Future. John F. Kennedy's time as president was full of hope and vision. Jack believed that America could achieve great things. He wanted the country to dream big, work hard, and make the impossible possible. His words inspired people to believe in a brighter future. Jack had many goals for his presidency. He wanted to improve education, fight poverty, and create opportunities for every American. He also dreamed of a peaceful world where nations worked together instead of fighting. But one dream stood out above all others: sending a man to the moon. In 1961, Jack made a bold announcement. He told Congress, "I believe this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth." His words were ambitious and daring. No one had ever done it before. Many thought it was impossible. But Jack believed in the power of science and innovation. He believed in the American spirit, the determination to achieve greatness. He encouraged scientists, engineers, and astronauts to push beyond their limits. He made space exploration a national priority. Jack's moon challenge wasn't just about winning the space race against the Soviet Union. It was about something bigger. It was about proving that humanity could reach for the stars. Jack often said, "We do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard." He believed that difficult challenges made us stronger and united. The space program energized the country. People followed every mission, watching as rockets launched into the sky. Children dreamed of becoming astronauts. Scientists worked day and night, inspired by Jack's vision. The moon seemed far away, but Jack made people believe it was possible. Jack also cared deeply about education. He knew that the future depended on the next generation. He wanted every child in America to have a chance to succeed, no matter where they came from or how much money their family had. Jack supported programs to improve schools and help teachers. He encouraged students to study math and science, preparing them for the challenges of the modern world. Knowledge is power, he often said. He believed education was the key to solving the world's problems. One of Jack's favorite themes was youth. He believed that young people could change the world. In his inauguration speech, he famously said, "The torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans." These words inspired millions. Jack called on young people to get involved, to serve their communities, and to make a difference. He created the Peace Corps, a program that sent young Americans to help people in other countries. Volunteers taught in schools, built homes, and worked in hospitals. The Peace Corps became a symbol of hope and friendship between nations. Jack was proud of the program and the young people who answered his call. Jack's speeches often made people feel proud to be American. He had a way of connecting with everyone, no matter their background. He spoke about unity, about working together to solve problems. In a time when the world was divided by the Cold War, Jack reminded people of the importance of peace. He once said, "Our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal." These words touched hearts and made people think about what truly mattered. But Jack's dreams were not without challenges. He faced criticism from those who thought he was asking for too much. Some people thought the moon mission was too expensive. Others thought his focus on education and peace was unrealistic. Jack listened to their concerns, but he didn't let them stop him. He believed in his vision and kept moving forward. Behind the scenes, Jack worked tirelessly to make his dreams a reality. He held meetings with scientists, educators, and world leaders. He studied reports, asked questions, and made tough decisions. Even when his health problems made him tired, he pushed through. He wanted to leave the world better than he found it. Jack's family also inspired his dreams for the future. His wife, Jackie, shared his passion for education and culture. She worked to bring art and history to the White House, making it a place of learning and inspiration. Jack's children, Caroline and John Jr., reminded him of the importance of building a better world for the next generation. Jack often spoke about the future. He imagined a world where poverty was reduced, where education was accessible to all, and where nations lived in peace. He knew these dreams would take time, but he believed they were worth pursuing. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams, he said. In 1962, Jack visited Rice University in Texas to talk about his moon mission. Standing before a large crowd, he spoke with passion and conviction. "We choose to go to the moon," he said, "not because it is easy, but because it is hard." The audience erupted in applause. They felt Jack's excitement and shared his belief in what America could achieve. Jack's dreams for the future were not just about science, education, or peace. They were about hope. He believed that when people came together, they could accomplish anything. He wanted Americans to feel proud, not just of their country, but of themselves. He reminded them that they had the power to shape the future. Even though Jack's time as president was short, his dreams left a lasting impact. After his death, his vision continued to guide the nation. In 1969, just 6 years after Jack's famous speech, Neil Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon. Millions of people around the world watched as Armstrong took his first steps and said, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." It was the moment Jack had dreamed of, and it became a reality. Today, John F. Kennedy is remembered as a leader who dared to dream big. His words and actions inspired a generation to believe in the power of hope, hard work, and unity. His dreams for the future remind us that even the biggest challenges can be overcome when we work together. Jack's legacy lives on in the hearts of those who continue to reach for the stars, fight for justice, and believe in a better tomorrow. Chapter 10. A Tragic Day in Dallas. November 22, 1963, was a sunny day in Dallas, Texas. The streets were filled with people. Men, women, and children stood in long lines, hoping to catch a glimpse of President John F. Kennedy. Jack was visiting Texas to speak about his plans for the future. He wanted to unite the people and gain their support for the changes he believed in. Jack and his wife, Jackie, were riding in an open-top car. Jackie wore a pink suit and waved to the cheering crowds. Jack smiled, his hand raised in a friendly wave. He loved meeting people. The excitement in the air was contagious. As the car moved through downtown Dallas, the crowds grew bigger. People shouted, "We love you, Jack!" and "Welcome to Dallas!" Children waved small American flags. Jack leaned over to Jackie and said, "It's a beautiful day." The motorcade turned onto Elm Street. The car slowed as it passed the Texas School Book Depository, a large brick building. Jack continued to wave. Suddenly, a loud sound echoed through the streets. It sounded like a firecracker. People looked around, confused. Then came another sound, and another. Jackie turned to Jack, her face full of fear. "Jack!" she cried. But it was too late. Jack had been shot. The crowd froze in shock. People screamed and ran. Some dropped to the ground, holding their children close. The car sped away, heading for the nearest hospital. Jackie cradled Jack in her arms, tears streaming down her face. "Stay with me, Jack," she whispered. But Jack didn't respond. At Parkland Hospital, doctors worked desperately to save the president. Nurses rushed in and out of the operating room. The world seemed to stop as everyone waited for news. But the damage was too severe. At 1 p.m., John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead. He was just 46 years old. The news spread quickly. In homes, offices, and schools across America, people listened to the radio and watched the news on television. When they heard the words, "President Kennedy has died," many couldn't believe it. Tears filled their eyes. Some dropped to their knees and prayed. Others hugged their loved ones tightly, overwhelmed with grief. The Vice President, Lyndon B. Johnson, was sworn in as the new president that same day. Jackie stood by his side, still wearing her pink suit, now stained with Jack's blood. She refused to change her clothes. "I want them to see what they've done," she said. The nation was heartbroken. People cried in the streets, asking, "Why?" Jack had been so full of life, so full of dreams. How could he be gone? The young president who had inspired hope and courage was no longer there to lead them. World leaders sent messages of condolence. Across the globe, people mourned Jack's death. In Ireland, his ancestral homeland, church bells rang. In Paris, London, and Tokyo, people gathered to light candles and say prayers. Jack had touched hearts far beyond America. Jack's funeral took place on November 25, 1963, in Washington, D.C. Thousands of people lined the streets to pay their respects. World leaders came to honor the fallen president. Jackie walked behind Jack's flag-draped coffin, holding the hands of their two young children, Caroline and John Jr. One moment from the funeral would stay in people's hearts forever. As the coffin passed, little John Jr., just 3 years old, saluted his father. The image was captured by photographers and became a symbol of the nation's grief. Jack was buried in Arlington National Cemetery near Washington, D.C. At his gravesite, an eternal flame was lit. The flame would burn forever, a symbol of Jack's spirit and the hope he had given to the world. After Jack's death, questions remained. Who had killed the president? Why had this happened? Investigators discovered that a man named Lee Harvey Oswald had fired the shots from the Texas School Book Depository. Oswald was arrested but never stood trial. Just 2 days after Jack's death, Oswald was killed by another man while in police custody. The tragedy left the nation with unanswered questions and a deep sense of loss. But it also united people in their grief. Jack's death reminded everyone of the importance of his message: to work for peace, justice, and a better future. Jack's time as president was short, but his impact was lasting. He had inspired people to dream big and believe in themselves. He had faced challenges with courage and determination. Even in death, Jack's legacy lived on. His famous words, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country," continued to echo in the hearts of Americans. People remembered him as a leader who believed in the power of hope and action. Jack's tragic death in Dallas marked the end of a chapter, but it was not the end of his story. His dreams for America and the world remained alive. His leadership, his courage, and his vision for a better future would continue to inspire generations to come. The young president, full of life and dreams, may have been taken too soon, but his light would never fade. Chapter 11. The Nation Mourns. The news of John F. Kennedy's death spread across the world. In homes, schools, and offices, people stopped what they were doing. Radios played soft music, and television anchors spoke with sadness in their voices. It was a moment of shock and grief, not just for America, but for the world. Jack had been a symbol of hope. He had spoken of the future, of dreams, and of unity. Now he was gone. People cried openly in the streets. Strangers hugged each other, sharing their sorrow. Churches held special services, and candles burned in windows across the country. Jack's funeral was held on November 25th, 1963, 3 days after his death. The streets of Washington, D.C. were filled with silence. Crowds stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting to say goodbye to their president. Some held flowers. Others held signs that said, "We will never forget you, Jack." Jack's coffin, draped in the American flag, was carried through the streets on a horse-drawn carriage. It was a solemn sight. Soldiers marched alongside, their heads bowed in respect. Behind the coffin walked Jackie Kennedy and her 2 children, Caroline and John Jr. They were dressed in black, their faces showing both strength and sadness. Millions of people around the world watched the funeral on television. In their living rooms, families sat together, their eyes fixed on the screen. They saw Jackie walking bravely, holding her children's hands. They saw world leaders gathered in Washington, paying their respects. They saw a nation united in mourning. At the funeral mass, prayers were said for Jack's soul. The church was filled with the sound of hymns and the soft whispers of the grieving. Jackie sat quietly, her children by her side. She held her head high, showing incredible strength in the face of loss. After the funeral, Jack's coffin was taken to Arlington National Cemetery. It was a cold, gray day. The sound of the military band played softly as the coffin was lowered into the ground. Soldiers fired a salute, and a bugle played taps. The mournful notes echoed across the cemetery. Then came a moment that no one would forget. At Jack's grave, Jackie lit a flame. It was called the Eternal Flame. This flame would burn forever, a symbol of Jack's spirit. It represented his dreams, his courage, and the hope he had given to so many. Little John Jr., just 3 years old, stood beside his mother. As his father's coffin passed, he raised his small hand in a salute. It was a simple gesture, but it touched hearts around the world. People wept as they watched the young boy honor his father. The days after Jack's death were filled with sadness, but also reflection. People remembered his speeches, his smile, and his vision for the future. They whispered his famous words, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." These words became a guiding light for a grieving nation. Jack had inspired people to believe in themselves and in each other. He had shown that leadership was about service and hope. Even in death, his message lived on. Around the world, people paid tribute to Jack. In Ireland, his ancestral homeland, church bells rang in his honor. In Paris, the Eiffel Tower's lights were dimmed as a sign of respect. In Tokyo, thousands gathered to hold a silent vigil. Jack had been more than just a leader. He had been a symbol of unity and peace. In schools, children wrote essays about Jack. They talked about his dream of sending a man to the moon, his fight for civil rights, and his hope for a better future. Teachers told their students, Jack Kennedy believed in young people. He believed that you could change the world. The Eternal Flame at Arlington became a place of pilgrimage. People traveled from all over the country to visit Jack's grave. They stood quietly, looking at the flame, and thought about the man who had led their nation. Some left flowers. Others simply whispered, "Thank you, Jack." Jack's death left many questions. Why had this happened? What would the future hold without him? These questions lingered, but so did his legacy. His life reminded people of the power of courage and determination. His death reminded them of the fragility of life and the importance of continuing his work. Jack had once said, "A man may die, nations may rise and fall, but an idea lives on." His ideas of hope, unity, and progress lived on in the hearts of millions. They became a part of America's story. Jack's family also carried on his legacy. Jackie worked to preserve his memory, creating the John F. Kennedy Library and Museum. It became a place where people could learn about Jack's life and his vision for the future. His brother, Bobby Kennedy, continued the fight for justice and equality, inspired by Jack's courage. For many, Jack Kennedy was more than a president. He was a symbol of what America could be, a place of opportunity, fairness, and hope. His life, though short, had changed the world, and his memory would never fade. In the years that followed, people often looked back on Jack's time as president. They remembered his smile, his laughter, and his determination to make the world better. They remembered the way he made them feel, that anything was possible if they worked together. Jack's funeral marked the end of a life, but it was also the beginning of a legacy. The eternal flame at his grave reminded everyone that his spirit was still alive. It burned brightly, just as Jack had burned brightly during his time on Earth. John F. Kennedy was gone, but his dream for a better world remained. It was a dream that inspired millions, a dream that continues to inspire today. The nation mourned, but it also remembered, and in remembering, it found the strength to carry his vision forward. Chapter 12. A Legacy That Lives On. John F. Kennedy is remembered as one of America's greatest presidents. His life was short, but his impact was enormous. People still talk about his courage, his vision, and his ability to inspire others. His words, his actions, and his dreams continue to guide the nation. Jack believed in the power of hope. He believed that with hard work, anything was possible. He once said, "Let every nation know that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, to assure the survival and the success of liberty." These words remind us of his unwavering belief in freedom and justice. Jack's image is everywhere. His face appears on coins and stamps. Schools, airports, and buildings across the country are named after him. There is even a NASA space center that carries his name, honoring his dream to send a man to the moon. One of the most visited places in America is the John F. Kennedy Library and Museum in Boston. It was built to preserve Jack's memory and inspire future generations. Inside, visitors can see photos, letters, and videos from Jack's life. They learn about his leadership and his belief in a better future. Jack's famous speeches are still remembered today. His words challenge us to think about what we can do for our communities, our country, and the world. His most famous line, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country," inspires people to take action. It reminds us that leadership is not just for presidents, it's for everyone. Jack's influence is also felt in the way we see space exploration. His challenge to send a man to the moon changed history. On July 20th, 1969, just 6 years after his death, astronaut Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon. His first words were, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." The Apollo mission fulfilled Jack's dream. It showed the world what could be achieved when people worked together. Jack also made a lasting impact on civil rights. His support for equality helped pave the way for the Civil Rights Act, which became law after his death. This law ended segregation in public places and made discrimination illegal. Jack's courage in fighting for justice continues to inspire leaders today. For many, Jack's leadership during the Cuban Missile Crisis is his greatest legacy. He showed the world that peace was possible, even in the face of war. His calm, steady hand during those 13 tense days saved countless lives. His ability to lead with strength and wisdom remains a model for presidents and leaders around the globe. Jack's family also plays a big part in keeping his memory alive. His wife, Jackie, worked tirelessly to honor his legacy. She created the eternal flame at his grave, a symbol of Jack's enduring spirit. His brother, Robert Kennedy, continued Jack's work for justice and equality, and his children, Caroline and John Jr., carried their father's values into their own lives. The eternal flame at Arlington National Cemetery is a place of reflection. Visitors from all over the world come to stand by Jack's grave. They look at the flame and remember his life, his dreams, and his leadership. They think about the hope he gave to millions. Jack's story is one of courage and resilience. He faced illness, war, and tragedy, but he never gave up. He believed that one person could make a difference. He showed us that even when life is hard, we must keep moving forward. His life teaches us important lessons. It teaches us to dream big, to work for what we believe in, and to stand up for what is right. It shows us the power of leadership, not just in government, but in our everyday lives. Jack's influence reaches far beyond America. Around the world, people remember him as a leader who cared about peace and fairness. He was a symbol of hope during a time of fear and uncertainty. His legacy reminds us that the world can change when we work together. Even in the face of tragedy, Jack's light still shines. His death was a great loss, but his life left an even greater gift. It left us with a vision of what is possible. It showed us the power of unity, courage, and hope. John F. Kennedy's story is not just the story of a president. It is the story of a man who believed in people, in possibilities, and in the future. His legacy lives on in the hearts of those who continue to dream, to lead, and to make a difference. As long as there are people who believe in hope and progress, Jack's vision will never fade. His story will continue to inspire generations to come, and his light will continue to guide us toward a better tomorrow.